Hello everyone, this is Tom in Los Angeles. I hope you're doing well and I thank you for being here and watching this video. Today I'm going to talk about the 31st canto of Dante's Inferno, a very interesting canto because it's the famous canto of the giants within Inferno, and even if it's a transitional canto because it's used by Dante to move from Malebolge, which was the 8th circle, to the next and final circle of Inferno, which is the 9th. It presents a lot of interesting features and things to ponder on. And also, it just like any other canto, it does have a deeper layer, which has mostly to do with language. The great theme that is hidden behind, or not really hidden, but that's shown throughout the 31st canto, is that of the fallen language. The language as biblically fallen from Babel, and what happened since. It's a theme that was very dear to Dante because he was, yes, a poet and a writer, but he also was a linguist. He was we can say almost in modern terms, a scientist of language. And he had summarized most of his theories of language, of the history of language, etc., in a work called De Vulgari Eloquentia, all written in Latin because Latin was considered the language of the academic and intellectual people of his times, where he theorized the fact that a language is something that necessarily keeps changing, and that's something that for his time was quite a pioneeristic concept to bring forward. We can see this focus on the linguistic fall from the very first line of the canto, where in Italian Dante says una medesima lingua prima mi morse, si che mi tinse, etc. And Pinsky in English translates one and the same tongue made me feel its sting. So while Dante is speaking about what Virgil just told him in the previous canto, he's using an expression that, if read under a different angle, refers to one and the same tongue, which was biblically what every man and woman was speaking in Babel, or at least before, of course, the fall of Babel. And in this original world, everybody was speaking one and the same language. This is what Dante is referring to here. I'm always constantly amazed by how just one sentence he uses the same words and is telling us 4 or 5 things, and I catch maybe 2 or 3. It starts with this simile. Dante refers to Achilles' lance, that was what his father Peleus had given him, and had this magical property of curing a wound the second time that it would hit a person. The second touch, it would cure the wound. And this is the same way that Virgil's words felt to him. In the first moment, hurting and stinging, and the second moment, being a balm for his soul. It's a very beautiful way to put it. So he connects this with the end of the 30th canto and describes a quick crossing that Virgil and him do to exit Malebolge and to get to this transitional place where we know, if you already have read the canto, the entire plot of the canto is very simple. They are on this transitional place, almost a terrace, where these immense giants are infixed. You can see them only from the waist up, and just like Geryon helped them before, one particular giant Anteos will help them go from the 8th to the 9th circle. And the reason why there are these huge cliffs and difference in levels is really allegorical. It's a way for Dante to say, I'm considering all the sins in this fraudulence malebolge roughly along the same plane, spiritually speaking, but the next sins that we're going to see, which are going to have to do with betrayal in particular, treachery and betrayal, have at least an additional degree in seriousness and gravity. In the 5th tertina here, we can find Charlemagne and a quote from the famous Chanson de Roland, which was a French epic, where Roland, and in particular Dante, is referring to the episode of the defeat in Roncesvalles, the famous defeat at the end of which Roland blew his horn so strongly that the veins in his neck exploded and he died in the legend. Dante is using it to compare it to the intensity of this sound of a horn that he can hear from afar, this signal. And so we know is the giant Nimrod doing this, blowing this horn. But before getting there, he's also comparing the situation in the Chanson de Roland to the current situation he's describing. In other words, Nimrod, the giant, is blowing the horn to advise his own emperor, who is Satan, just like Roland was blowing his horn to advise Charlemagne, although it was too late and Charlemagne came and saw that everybody was dead. The defeat was complete. In fact, there is an interesting fact about the particular defeat of Roncesvalles, which I looked it up. It was in 778 AD. The fact that in history and in the legend, the people, the army that Roland was fighting was the one of the Saracens, the infidels in a sense. But it's been confirmed by historians that those were actually Basques. The army that Roland was fighting in that particular famous battle were Basques, were Spanish people against Charlemagne, in probably partially in revenge for the French destruction of Pamplona, or of the walls of Pamplona. In any case, this is a way to also introduce us to the theme of betrayal, because there was a very famous traitor in this story of Roncesvalles. His name was Ganelon, who we will see very soon in Canto 32. Ganelon betrayed Roland in this battle, and he was part of the reason why Roland was defeated. So, as a traitor in a very important and crucial battle, he finds himself in the 9th circle of the traitors. I find it a little funny, really, that Virgil, a couple of tertinas below, says to Dante, before we go much farther along, learn now, in order that the fact may prove less strange, these are not towers, but a ring of giants. In other words, Virgil is telling Dante, what you're thinking, what you think you're seeing, towers, because Dante thinks it's a city, because he thinks these are towers in the distance through the fog. They're not towers. It's something that is actually much less strange. They're actual giants. I don't know under what kind of logic the fact that they're giants is less strange, but it makes me smile. They're giants, and by reading the Bible, by reading Genesis, Dante probably thought that giants were creatures that many centuries before used to actually exist. And we have a comment on this later on in this canto. In any case, he's comparing this entrance to the pit of the bottom of hell to Monte Regione. There was an outpost, very small little village between Florence and Siena, surrounded by many high towers, something like 14 towers, this Monte Regione. Why are there giants here? They are giants because, first of all, the giants had, in classical mythology, defied Jupiter and defied the gods of Mount Olympus. So there is, to start with, a reference to classical mythology and the fact that a group of giants in general, being there, they represent pride. This sense of pride as the worst sin keeps coming back in in Inferno in particular, as the worst sin, as the base from which, the root from which all the sins come from. Dante spends a little bit of time giving us some kind of features and indications about the size of these giants. He's describing the giant, and he's saying that his face appeared and as long as full as the bronze pine cone of St. Peter's at Rome. This pine cone, made of bronze, actually still exists today. It's something that in Dante's time was exhibited in St. Peter every now and then or on a constant basis, but today it can be found in the Vatican museums. And it's huge. It's probably something like 10 or 11 feet high, and this is the head of the giant. So somebody, in fact, made the effort to calculate indicatively how tall this giant must be. You make an assumption on how tall these three men of Friesland should be, one on top of each other, one on top of the other, and the 30 spans. Somebody calculated that the total would come up to 35 feet from the waist to the head, and so the giant must be 70 feet tall in total. Nimrod screams. He produces this enigmatic scream, which reminds us of Pape Satan Aleppe, which was by Plutus. And he screams, Rafael, mai amekke zabi almi, which the vast majority of commentators agree that it's nonsense, written on purpose by Dante to show that Nimrod, who was in fact this king who convinced man to build the Tower of Babylon, and so he is punished with the fact that he can only communicate nonsense. Even though there are some Jewish language roots in these words, most people say that this is really pure linguistic nonsense. And it makes sense because Virgil confirms it later on. There is a difference, of course, because both in Genesis, in the Bible, and in the City of God by Augustine, God's punishment is in the difference of languages, while here, in a sense, Dante's invention is that the punishment for Nimrod is this non-language that cannot communicate anything, and so he cannot listen and he cannot communicate. In Genesis, by the way, Nimrod was not an actual giant. It's Augustine who, in City of God, made him into a giant. Going back for a second to the De Volgari Eloquentia by Dante, his treatise on language, his main principle about multiplicity of languages or unity was that in general, oneness of language or unity was good, and multiplicity or diversity of languages was bad. Definitely throughout the comedy, there is an evolution of Dante's thought about language. At the end of Paradiso, he will comment about the Tower of Babylon again in Paradiso 26, and he will make a comment about the fact that multiplicity is not bad. The diversity of languages is a normal human thing that has been provided by God. Dante and Virgil proceed and they get to another giant. This giant is Ephialtes, is fiercer and greater. Ephialtes is a giant who was part of this gang of giants who defied Jupiter, and they were destroyed by Jupiter. It's again always the same type of sin: hubris or pride, wanting to put yourself in the place of God. Ephialtes is in a position where he is all chained up, and Dante wonders how is it possible that who is being so powerful to chain him up like that, such a huge creature. And at this point, Dante asks Virgil if it's possible for me to come to where my eyes might have experience of Briareus. I wish I could see that particular giant. Why does Dante ask this? Because he never does anything by chance. He's asking Virgil to see this giant because this giant is present in the Aeneid, in Virgil's Aeneid. And there is something else here that he doesn't say. The way that Virgil answers this request is Antaeus, whom you'll see some distance hence, can speak and is unchained as well. He will convey us to scenes profoundest abyss. The one you wish to see is further ahead, and is bound and fashioned as this one is, though somewhat more ferocious in his look. It's almost as if Virgil sounds like he's minimizing the importance for Dante to see this other giant Briareus, and very likely there is a subtle irony here from Dante, because in the Aeneid, Virgil described Briareus, this giant, in a very exaggerated fashion, physically. In the Aeneid, this giant was described with 100 arms and 100 hands, with 50 different mouths that were spitting fire. And even Virgil himself in the Aeneid follows with a certain kind of literary apology for how exaggerated he is in describing this creature. So probably Dante is picking up on that and playing a little bit with that comment, because he knows that Virgil had just exaggerated, and Virgil doesn't want Dante to actually see Briareus as he actually is, which probably is a bit more normal than how he looks in the Aeneid. Once they get to Antaeus, the third giant that they see, Virgil speaks to him and tries to ingratiate him, to convince him basically to help them and cross and get to the ninth circle. It's interesting how the Nimrod just screamed nonsense. Ephialtes was very angry and like a beast. He didn't want to cooperate. In order to make Antaeus cooperate, Virgil tries to use his intelligence and his words. It reminds Antaeus of the Battle of Zama, where in verse 110 he says, "O you who in that fateful valley that made Scipio inheritor of glory." That's a battle where Scipio defeated Hannibal in the Punic Wars, and that was 202 before Christ, Battle of Zama. That's what Virgil is referring to be on his good side. And all these are details that, by the way, Virgil, the character, is taking from the writings of Lucan, who is a poet, which is an impossibility because Lucan is a poet who lived after Virgil. But Dante doesn't care too much about this. Hercules was fighting with Antaeus, and the way he defeated him was interesting because Antaeus was son of Gea, the goddess of earth, and therefore he was invincible as long as his feet were touching the earth. Hercules understands that, and as soon as he does, he lifted Antaeus from the earth, from the ground, and and basically killed him once he was lifted from the ground. That's why Dante in verse 130, 32, he's saying, in haste, the giant stretched out in haste those hands, whose grip clasped Hercules, and took my leader Virgil. Towards the end of the canto, there is a really beautiful simile to the Garisenda Tower in Bologna, which is a leaning tower. And here I get asked sometimes, you know, there are so many leaning towers in Italy. Are you sure that your ancestors knew what they were doing when they were building towers? I don't know. There are so many towers in Italian history, and I don't exactly know why the Bologna, one of the two main towers of Bologna, is leaning, but it's still there. And finally, they are deposited on the plane of the ninth circle, the Cocito, and we are now at the very lowest point in Dante's Inferno. In fact, it's the lowest point in the universe, in Dante's universe. As I read this canto, I thought about this concept of pride, the sin of pride, which historically has always been considered, from St. Thomas to all the Catholic doctrine, but I think outside Christianity as well, the worst sin. And we can see it coming back over and over in the Divine Comedy, in Inferno, Capaneus, etc., etc. These characters who defied God, and characters who wanted to put themselves in the place of God as because of pride. Even the alchemists, for example, doing things that are reserved to God. So I wondered myself, why is pride so bad? What's so bad about pride? And it's not simply, the answer cannot be simple. It's not simply that God is a king and we are the servants and we need to obey. This is really not what it's about. It's more psychological, and it has to do with a human being, with our nature. So I went to look in Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. It's a very, very famous book by C.S. Lewis, where the author talks about pride, and he says pride is the anti-God state, the position in which the ego, and the self are directly opposed to God. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. So that already illuminates for me something about this presence of the giants around the pit of hell, because pride is the sin of the devil. He was prideful, wanted to rebel against God, and that's why he finds himself there. So it's really, that's how it starts, at least theologically. C.S. Lewis also adds, true humility is not thinking less of yourself. True humility is thinking of yourself less. It's almost a joke, but it's really wise. It's actually, even in Buddhism, to go outside of Christianity, within the Buddhist tradition, in Buddhism, it's the worst, pride is considered the worst poison that harms our perception and behavior. Pride. And in Christianity, it's considered the root, the basis for all of other sins. So it's really something that is recognized as being almost the natural direction where all of us go to, and that we have to try and fight. And in order to fight it, there is the direction of humility, which is not easy, but going down on our knees as an act, as a behavior, is the beginning of the cure. Going down on the knees is a sign of humility, and it happens in, I would say, probably the majority of religions. So here we are at the bottom of hell, finally, and with Canto 32 we're going to see this iced lake, which is Cocito, also in itself divided in some areas, with Lucifer in the very center. And In the next canto, Dante will actually have a violent reaction against a condemned soul. So that's going to be interesting to see. And there are a couple of things about the geography of the bottom of hell that I cannot wait to get and to discuss about. For now, thank you so much for watching, and we'll speak soon.